Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome to another weekly study. And today we're going to talk about in this video tempo or repetition tempo. I think it was Kelly had asked a question in the Facebook group about trying to understand tempo. And here's what happened is when I read through it, we actually got a good response. One of the students who knows the 6th edition versus the 7th edition actually responded and said, well, if you're talking about the 3-number tempo, that's actually from the 6th edition. Yeah. So NASM made a number of changes. And just as an aside, this is one of the reasons why we recommend, if you're going to take the exam, you could pass the NASM right today. You could pass the exam using the 6th edition because the material is, for the most part, 80%, 85, I don't know, somewhere around there. It's pretty much all the same. But they made a number of substantive changes and added some things and removed other things. I thought it was a great move from the 6th to the 7th edition, and this was one of them. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get lots of questions from chapter 20 because that's where this is coming from. You will get questions without a doubt. How many you get from it, I don't know. And I'll just tell you right now, with repetition tempo, generally the questions are very straightforward. That's why I want to go over this with you. You would get a question something like a client is performing a push-up, or a client is performing, and they'll give you an exercise, is performing a particular exercise, and the repetition tempo is, and they'll give you 4 numbers, right? So 4, 2, 3, and 1, just as an example. How many seconds is this client performing the eccentric or the concentric part of the exercise? That's the type of question that you would get. You would need to know that the 4, right, in this repetition tempo sequencing, the first number, the 4, the first number always represents the eccentric. The second number is one of the 2 isometric contractions during a repetition, if there are 2 isometrics, and I'll explain that to you in a second. The third number is always the concentric part of the contraction, and the 4th again is the isometric. It's by convention that we always start with the eccentric, then the isometric, concentric, isometric when we're talking about repetition tempo. It's just everybody high fives each other and goes, yeah, which one should we start with? Right? Because not every exercise starts with the eccentric contraction. I hope that makes sense. Okay, when you do a squat or a lunge or a push-up, right, you're starting, the first part of the movement that you do is going to be the eccentric on the particular agonistic muscle. Let's give an example. During a squat, let's just say you got a bar in the back. It doesn't matter. Bar, you're holding on to something, but you're standing up and you begin the exercise standing up, which means, now work with me on this. If you're standing up, what are the kinesiological positions, or what are the biomechanical positions that your joints are in? And what is the primary or the agonistic muscle that you're training? Well, generally in a squat, it's the quadricep, right? We say we're working your quads. You do squats to work your quads as the main or agonistic muscle. Now, look, please let's not get into a tit for tat. Yes, the glutes are a very powerful component of the exercise at the hip joint. But again, when I train squats, do I get gluteal and hamstrings and lower back? Of course, but we got to make this simple for explanatory purposes. So we normally say I'm training my quads, right? Well, I'm standing up. My first part of the movement is going from a position where my hips are in an extended position, knees are in an extended position, right? And then I start to go down. Well, what happens when I start to move down? What's the first thing that happens? My quadriceps go into a eccentric contraction. I mean, that's as you go down, what happens? Well, as you flex the knee, the quadriceps start to lengthen. And what is an eccentric contraction? It's when a muscle lengthens while it's under tension. Concentric muscle shortens while it's under tension. So you get the idea. So in this case, you would obviously say that squats begin with the eccentric contraction. However, when you're doing a dumbbell curl or any type of curl, What's the first movement? It's not an eccentric contraction. What is it? It's a concentric. I don't start my dumbbell curls up here, do I? You don't do that. You don't pull the dumbbells up and go, okay, let's go ahead and get ready. No, you start with the dumbbells down at your side. So the point is that even though bicep curls, the initial contraction is a concentric, we don't worry about how it starts, if it starts out concentric or eccentric. In the terminology and the usage from an academic perspective, and even in a real world perspective, we always say, okay, the eccentric, right? That's the movement speed that we're talking about. So in a dumbbell curl, that third number, when you're looking at the tempo variable, that third number is the one that we generally start with, right? So if I do a 3-2, or let's say a 4-2-3-1 tempo on my dumbbell curls, 4-2-3-1, I'm going to do it for 3 seconds on the way up. In other words, the concentric is going to take 3 seconds, right? 1 second in the isometric, and then 4 seconds on the negative, and then 1 second or whatever, however you want to do it. And just so you know, when you're going through this, an X simply means that you're doing it as fast as you can. That's all. So if you see, for instance, on a squat, and I do this, by the way, this has real world implications. I've been using personally and with all my clients since the 1980s. I've been using the tempo components, but not every exercise has all 4 components associated with them. They for sure have the eccentric and the concentric, and at least one of the isometrics, but not every exercise has a 4th isometric contraction. But for the sake of academic purposes, we always put 4 numbers. The X simply means that you're moving it up as fast as you can. There's no speed component to it. Normally what I'll do is I'll put an X to either, if it's in the isometric or the eccentric, that's for speed, fast. If I put an X, for instance, you could use a 0, but I will generally use an X in the isometric, those 2 isometric numbers, to indicate no rest. Because remember, the isometric is when the muscle is at its position of tension with no change in length. That's an isometric contraction. Iso, same, right? So isometric, same length. So an isometric contraction means that the muscle, although it's under tension, is not changing length. So it's not moving. So in a dumbbell curl, the concentric contraction, bicep shortens under tension and then gets to a top position. Well, before you change direction from going up to going down, there's this stationary point that we call the isometric and isometric contraction. Now I can come up here and I can squeeze it and flex it for 2 seconds. Honestly, it's a waste. Don't be squeezing it, folks. Come on. Don't be squeezing at the top. Ain't doing anything. This whole idea that you're developing a peak. Come on, come into the real world of science and actual physiology. You ain't building no peak on your bicep. Please. But that's a whole nother talk, isn't it? So the idea is that when I get to the top, I'm going to pause and then I'm going to move right into the negative. Then when I get to the bottom of the negative or the eccentric, right, I'm going to hit another isometric contraction. In other words, I'm going to stop. My muscle is still under tension, but I'm paused. Does that make sense? Now, in that case, do you have a true isometric contraction at the top? Me, personally, I'm going to tell you no. There's very little, if any, tension developed at the top. That's why you have to squeeze it. Normally, I would say with the bicep curl, it's a positive or concentric, no rest at the top, go right into the negative, and then pause in the stretch or elongated isometric. And you can pause that for however long you want, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, or no pause at all. So the X can distinguish between speed, right, as fast as you can, for instance, on a power type of movement or strength training movement, like on a 1 max bench, you're trying to push that thing as fast and as hard as you can. That's what X would indicate. Or if you're talking about the isometric contraction, that number, you can put an X in there as well, like I do, to denote no rest time in that particular isometric contraction. So again, the idea is that when you're doing the academic, when you're looking at this academically, it's really very straightforward, which is that NASM is going to give you 4 numbers, right? It's going to start out with the eccentric and then the isometric right at the bottom, just as a for instance, then the concentric, and then the other paused or isometric contraction. So I hope that makes sense. I think that was an introduction. Let me try and kill a couple of birds with one stone with you here as well. Even though I just gave you sort of the explanation of this idea of the tempo associated with a particular repetition, let me give you one other real world component to this. When you're studying, are you a audiological, are you a visual, or are you a tactile learner? Now, again, I've said this 1,000 times if I said it once. Learning styles can be a game changer for some folks. For other folks, it could be absolutely useless, meaningless, and have no effect on your studying because you got A's in all of your classes anyway. We know this. We know there are people that will literally read this book like this and go, got it, go out and take the NASM exam and pass. Congrats. Okay, that's not the way most people work. The way most people work, especially in the fitness industry, is that we are generally at least secondarily tactile, generally dominantly tactile learners. We can read it, we can write it, and that's going to help us with memorizing terms and some concepts. But at the end of the day, to get that, that kinesthetic sort of biomechanical conceptual stuff inside our brain, guess what we need to do? You need to sit there and look, read, recite, listen if you're audiological, but then you've got to do something that's got some physicality to it. And that means stepping back and going, okay, there's 4 components to the repetition. There's the eccentric, and then just pick an exercise. Lateral raises. Stop, get away from the book for a second and go, okay, so where's the concentric on a lateral raise? What is the concentric contraction on a lateral raise? Well, first you got to know what the primary or agonistic muscle is on a lateral raise. And what is it? Yeah, the deltoid. So if it's the deltoid, when the deltoid shortens under tension, it does what? Kinesiologically? Abducts the shoulder. Abduction, movement away from the midline of the body. Adduction, abduction. Deltoid lengthens, deltoid shortens. Now you got to do this and you got to kind of be looking and going, okay, well, if my deltoid, so that's the concentric. So that's going to be the 3rd number, right? And then go ahead and do this and watch. Let me write this down for you. Maybe I can actually. So now what you would do, use colored pens, right? Now you're talking about lateral raises. Okay, lateral raise. This is how you would study tempo, and it's going to help you. So lateral raise, and then you've got your 4 numbers. Okay, 4 numbers. This is always going to be the negative. The first number is the negative or the eccentric, right? Eccentric. And what's this one? Well, there's always an isometric contraction in between the different movement contractions. So eccentric is what? See how I'm throwing this in at the same, and I'm saying this out loud. The eccentric is when the muscle does what? Lengthens under tension, right? So that's the negative, right? We call that the negative. Nobody says eccentric. We always say the negative, right? Because this is way too complicated to say eccentric. What's this one? This is the isometric. One of the isometrics, right? This is going to be the isometric contraction because it's coming at the lengthened position of the muscle. This is when the muscle is at its lengthened position with no more shortening or lengthening. Remember, an isometric contraction is when the muscle has lengthened, stopped. Now the deltoid is at its longest length while it's still under tension before moving into, what's this one? This is the concentric, or what we call the positive. Nobody says concentric. Okay, please don't say concentric to me. I'm not impressed. Concentric, say positive. It's the positive. That's the normal colloquial usage that we have in the gym, in the health club, right? And then this is the next iso. Doesn't matter what exercise it is. Even though dumbbell curls generally start on the concentric contraction, it doesn't really matter. So with a lateral raise, it's the same thing, by the way. Lateral raises start with the concentric contraction. Got that? Hold on. Stay with me. Lateral raises start with the concentric. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go to train my deltoids and I do lateral raises, I don't grab 15-pound dumbbells and go, okay, let me start the exercise. Ew, 1. No, that's not how you do it. How do you do it? You start with the dumbbells down at your side, don't you? I know I do. If you don't, okay, that's up to you. By the way, there is a variation. I call them top downs, but I'm using 5-pound dumbbells and I do top downs, but that's a different subject. So I lift up. I start with the concentric, going to an isometric, eccentric, isometric. Make sense? It's really as simple as that. Let me get back to this. Let me get back to this for you. And so even though I am starting with the concentric on this particular exercise, right? Even though I'm starting here, I'm still going to use these numbers. So technically the question can ask, given a client is doing a lateral raise, and now watch this, and the tempo that's being used is going to be 5. Let's do 2. Let's do 3, and then let's do 1. Okay, so that's the tempo, 5, 2, 3, 1. It doesn't matter that I start this particular exercise in the concentric. By convention, academically and on a test, it's going to be 5. That's going to be the point. So 5, 2, 3, 1. Has everybody got that? Okay. 5, 2, 3, 1. Well, what does it look like then? Come on, tell me what it looks like. If my tempo on paper says 5, 2, 3, 1, then what does it look like in the real world if I'm going to use this, for instance, with my clients? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Hold it for 1 second, let it down for 5, pause at the bottom for 2. Does that make sense? I hope so. Because what's going to happen is they're going to give you an exercise. Now, I'm not saying they're going to give you lateral raises or whatever, but you need to understand that the tempo sequencing that's given always begins with the eccentric, and that's basically what they're showing you. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna pull this up for you because I've got both the, let me pull this down a little bit. I've got both the textbook, hardcover textbook, as well as what you're seeing in front of you, which is the online book. Of course, they're basically the same. There's very little difference. I'll be honest with you. I have a tough time learning from online books. You can do it. I'll tell you what I used to do is that, and I've done a lot of schooling online, done master's work online, and I've gotten, you know what I do is I basically print it out, or I print out those areas that I need so I can physically have it right here in front of me. So I do have my hardcover textbook, but it's just easier, obviously, to show you guys while I'm doing this video. So this is on page 620 is 620, 619. Acute variable starts on 618. This is chapter 20, obviously. So the acute variables, repetition sets, training intensity. Remember, use colored markers for those of you that are visual learners. If you are an audiological learner, again, say this over and over, I guess till I'm blue in the face. If you're an audiological learner, you've got to say the stuff out loud. Listening, for instance, listening to the video, but not watching me while you're doing this might actually be extremely beneficial for you. So if you're listening, I'll give you an example. If I am a primary audiological learner, What I'm going to do is I'm going to have the video, I'll have the video on, okay? But I'm going to focus on listening. This is a key strategy for you audiological folks. Key strategy is while you're listening, you can also tune into or engage the material and then put it on pause and make sure you got it. So, and by the way, this helps everybody. It's just that audiological learners have this primary strong need to listen to it, so that irrespective of whether you're looking at it on or reading it along with me, this is again, classic example of the audiological learner. Listen and read along. Now, me personally, I can't do that. It's the exact opposite for me. When I'm listening, I get too distracted. But if you are an audiological learner and you're finding you're getting frustrated by just reading, if you listen simultaneously while you're reading, this is sometimes why audiobooks can be really, really helpful, is listen, and read along and then stop. Okay, that's just a standard way from a studying perspective that you would handle and manage and engage this material. So as you're listening to, for instance, the video, you don't have to watch me. Okay, sometimes that's actually more distracting. Students tell me that all the time. You know, Doug, I listen to your videos. I just can't watch them because I can't watch. Why? Because visually, if you're not a visual learner, then you don't want to be getting distracted by somebody actually talking to you like you see me doing right now. So the point is that if you're audiological, if you are tactile, everybody's got to do the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody, I don't care what your learning style is, everybody, when it comes to the consumption of academic material, you need to read it and you need to rewrite it. Okay, for some of you, that's a little bit more of a challenge. For others, that's the key. That's what really works. But everybody needs to do it. It's what you then do after or in conjunction with that, especially when you've got written material. Now is when the audiological learner, you're doing the same thing as a visual tactile, but now you're listening, for instance. Hopefully you're listening to yourself as you've gone over the material, or you're listening again to the videos, obviously, as you've got here. If you're a visual learner, okay, you're reading and rewriting, but you're turning the audio off, just as a for instance. Get the idea? Now you can put all of your mind, all of your focus, all your attention onto reading, rewriting, right, and doing it over and over again. For you tactile folks, see that? That's the little squeezy ball that you use, okay? For you tactile learners, this becomes important. You're going to read it and you're going to recite it. And some of you can actually listen while you're doing it, but you need to have this in your other hand. And I've gone through this 1,000 times on different videos that I've done for you. This acts as a tactile distraction. Okay. It's one of the issues with folks that are, quote, tactile learners is, yes, you need to do all this other stuff, but when you're studying written material, you've got to distract your sensory, so to speak, your sensory components of what's going on around you, in and around you, so to speak, by using a sensory textural ball, and that's all you do. So basically, what I do is I have this in my hand, and I actually stop focusing on it, and I'm able to go and do my stuff. So I've got this in here. And now it's easier for me. I'm not getting distracted by, tactile, the need to have that physicality, the need satisfied for physicality, right? That's why I tap how many of you like tap your feet or do stuff like this all the time? That's all I've ever done all the time through school, especially when stuff got really, really boring. Well, if they had known about this stuff when I was growing up 100 years ago, things may be different, would have been different. So now I use this and it helps me to focus, believe it or not, allows me to focus on the materials. And as I'm reading it and I'm going through it, allows me to then read it, rewrite it, say it out loud while I'm doing that. Okay. So this is all additional tips for you as you go through this. So page 618 starts acute variables of training, moves you into repetition tempo. And so when you read through this, just make sure you get this part of it, okay, which is that there's 4 numbers. This is the academic part of this, 4 numbers. It starts with the eccentric for that exercise. It doesn't matter what the exercise is by convention. And now when you get to page 620, there's this helpful hint part, okay, which is probably the best part of this. Let me see if I can pull it in here for you. Let me get to this next page. There it is. There you go. The helpful hint part on page 620. You know, you can look at this lowering phase, pause immediately following the lowering phase. If it's a lowering phase, right? Raising phase. Now, and by the way, let me just give you a little bit of help here. It can get confusing. If you're using equipment such as cable machines, this is actually reversed. A great example would be, say, a tricep pushdown. Okay, so stay with me for a second. Where do you start a tricep pushdown? Do you start it with your hands in the down position, or do you start up here? So when I grab the cable and I have the bar and I'm doing a tricep pushdown, right? You know what I'm talking about, pushdowns. I start up here. Okay, now I start in the initial movement is going to be what? If I'm doing tricep pushdowns, the tricep is the agonist. That's the primary muscle I'm working. My elbows are bent and I'm about to push the weight down. What part of the exercise would be me pushing down? The concentric, right? Because my tricep is going to shorten under tension. That's the concentric contraction. Get the idea? But you see, I'm pushing it down. So if you look here, what is the eccentric? The lowering phase. I'm only telling you this because it can be confusing. Okay, but what can NASM do? They've got to write something. They got to kind of give you a hint. But as soon as you use a cable machine or you use bands or something like that, this is real world stuff. This can actually be reversed from an explanatory perspective. I hate to confuse you if it did. I hope this helps, because in chapter 20, acute variables are critically important. In fact, while I'm here, you might as well just go through and kind of look at some of your tables. Tables 1220, general recommendations for training frequency. You've got resistance training systems. There's a lot in chapter 20 that you got to know. And again, I'm not saying you're going to get 10, 15, 20 questions from chapter 20, but you're going to get a number of them. Okay. And you just got to keep that in mind. From a real world perspective, let me get out of the share. From a real world perspective, that's where we live. In the weightlifting world, that's where we live. Reps, sets, rest intervals, speed, right? Repetition tempo, i.e. speed of the repetition. How fast are you doing it? How much time you're spending in this, time under tension, all these different variables. From a test taking perspective, you need to know that of those 4 numbers, the first number always starts with, for that exercise, what its time will be for that particular contraction. Again, on a push-up or a squat, that's the first part of the movement anyway, the eccentric. But on a dumbbell curl, a lateral raise, a dumbbell shoulder press, you name the exercise, the concentric contraction, that third number is what you generally start the exercise with. So don't get confused by the fact that by convention, we say eccentric first, no matter what the exercise is. And then remember, there's always an isometric component in between the eccentric and the concentric. That's just how it works conventionally. That's how we do it. So I hope that helps when it comes to understanding repetition tempo. I would tell you this, that it's a really important concept, but try and keep tempo, repetition tempo, from a studying perspective inside of the broader category of acute variables of training. Okay, so normally what I would do is if I don't understand it, I'm going to show you what I just did. Right, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to try and get it straight in my head. But tempo, repetition tempo fits under the more broader rubric of explanation in chapter 20, which is acute variable. So just keep that in mind, that from a studying perspective, and of course it depends on how much time you have before you sit for the exam, you definitely want to write down acute variables as a main area to study, and then the list of all those acute variables and basically what they mean. Remember, NASM gives you a bunch of tables, a bunch of charts that compresses all the specifics of that information into the OPT model. Look, we are here first and foremost to help you pass that exam on the first attempt. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. The goal at Body Design University is just to help you to pass on the first attempt, or whatever attempt you're on, whether it's the second or third attempt. Remember, if you've taken a test already once and you failed, hopefully you didn't fail by too much, look at your domains and see those areas that you were deficient in, because that's where you're going to focus your study. But then again, if you failed, you know why you failed. Maybe you didn't study enough, or you didn't know what your learning style was, and you didn't study efficiently, and life happens. We're here to help you with that. Hope this was a helpful video. Again, leave your comments below if you have any questions. Post in the Facebook group. Also, if you're going to post, just make sure that the post has a very specific question, just like this one from this one student asking about this specific topic. Remember, this was from chapter 20, one of the acute variables. Ask us any questions, and we're here to help. Have a great weekend. See you.